Well, good morning, and thank you for joining us for our webinar on the top 5 do's and taboos for executive team continuity planning. Before we get started with our presentation, I'm going to review a few basic instructions for our audience. I want you all to please be aware that all participant lines will be muted for the entire presentation, we hope, in order to reduce noise and distractions heard on the line. At the end of the presentation, we will allow time for questions and answers. If you do have a question at that time that you would like addressed, you may type it in and we will read it off for you. And to do so, you just simply click on the Q&A button on the top menu bar at the top of your screen. You just type and submit your question, and we'll do our best to make sure that it is answered. All that being said, I'm happy to introduce our faculty for today's webinar. We have Kathy Hall, Senior Vice President of our Governance and Leadership Services Group. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Kathy now. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So thank you for joining us. Today we're going to talk about the executive team continuity planning. In today's challenging healthcare environment, all of us are very concerned about the challenge with healthcare reform, which seems to be front and center. I was just listening to them this morning. Some of our volumes are down, payments are changing. Some of us are even experiencing layoffs for the first time in the history of the organization. So we know what that means. We know that we're looking at our budgets and slashing costs wherever we can so that we can keep our people. However, when we slash those budgets, many times development is one that becomes slashed first. We wouldn't really think about slashing some other things. I'm sorry. Vicki, now I'm having trouble moving my slides.
Okay, Kathy, if you just want to use your mouse, you can click on your thumbnails. Can you see your thumbnails on the left side of the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Can you try clicking right into one of them?
Yes. Okay, thank you. I apologize for that. We're having a few technical difficulties this morning. But as we look at the importance of our human capital, Kathleen Allen, I think, said it very well. In today's healthcare organization, we compete as much on the strength of our human capital as on that of our financial capital. Intellectual property is a leadership issue as well as a legal issue. Where are your people on your balance sheet? The war for talent is real, even though the economy in today's market has seemed to have lessened that a bit. We're still in the same situation where we have our baby boomers are beginning to retire. We don't have the population after the baby boomers until the millennials, and so the war for talent is still there. How are you preparing your organization for this? Do the leaders know what it takes to be successful in your organization? Have you developed and do you talk about the competencies or the attributes and characteristics that make leaders successful in your organization? Do you know who your future leaders are, whether they're the frontline manager in laundry or lab, or whether they're the vice president that you have your eye on for the CEO succession? And once you know who those leaders are, do you know when they're going to be ready to move up to the next level of leadership? How are you preparing them to be ready in 1, 2, or even 5 years? Leadership continuity will help you do that planning. In a sense, continuity planning is simply a strategic plan for your leadership. Today we're going to look at the definition as we define leadership continuity, a very short market overview of the healthcare industry, some best practices, a case study, and then we'll end up with our topic of today, the 5 do's and taboos for executive team continuity planning, and finish it up with your questions. I want to reiterate what Vicki said in the beginning. Please type in your questions as you go, and there will also be time at the end for you to offer questions. So, again, thank you for joining us. Let's talk about our definition of leadership continuity. When we talk about leadership continuity, other words that come to mind are succession planning and talent management. These are all interrelated processes The way we think about succession planning, however, is more of replacement planning, one person for one person. When we talk about when we talk about leadership continuity planning, we're really looking at how are you developing that next pool of people to continue the leadership of your organization, continue the culture, continue the strategic objectives. Talent management really encompasses all of these and much more, including retention, recruitment, selection, rewards, performance appraisal. So all three are very important to achieve the effective talent pipeline that leadership continuity is really speaking to. Again, it's very distinct from standard succession planning as it looks at the organization and the individual needs, not just what the organization needs. It also looks across the organization. As we're going to see a little later in the case study, this organization that is our case study this morning actually was doing a pretty good job of succession planning within their silos. But when we opened up the entire organization and they looked across the organization, they were surprised at the depth of leadership that they had. And it just never thought about someone from a health plan moving to the hospital provider side. The other thing with leadership continuity planning is as we think into the future, you're always going to be assessing and updating your competencies or attributes of the leadership for your organization. Maybe there are different structures that need to be put in place. The old org structure just doesn't work anymore because the new person can't handle 19 direct reports because they haven't been here for 30 years. So it really brings up a lot for discussion and can be very invigorating. Again, just a quick look at the difference between succession planning and leadership continuity, primarily vertical versus horizontal, and the focus more immediate versus long-term. Okay, some of the goals for leadership continuity, as we see it, are to build a talent-rich organization, have zero talent outages, or promoting a certain percentage from within your organization, whatever that number might be. Attract, recruit, develop, and retain talent. This becomes one of the goals and is one of the goals and one of the results. As we know, talent attracts talent, and great leaders draw the best talent to them. People tend to become the leaders that they observe. And finally, leadership continuity programs can give your organization an unbelievable competitive advantage because you are always ready and able with the people inside your organization, your resources and intellectual capital to move the organization forward given your strategic initiative. Couldn't resist, given we're in the time of the Olympics, to look to an Olympian and a Stanley Cup winner for skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. And that can be one of the fact that we focus so much on today, because that's what's hurt. That's what's hurting us. That's what's tugging at our shirt strings. That's where the pain is today's challenges. They're real and they need to be addressed. But if we don't skate to where the puck is going to be or look ahead to what kinds of characteristics, attributes, and competencies we're going to need for our future leaders, we may find ourselves behind. So when we look at the current state of succession planning or continuity planning within healthcare, we significantly lag other non-healthcare companies. Quite frankly, no specific industry is doing a great job at succession or continuity planning. The National Center for Healthcare Leadership did a study using a 7-point scale, and they found that against some Fortune 100 organizations, healthcare systems averaged only 4.2 on a 7.0 scale on specific elements of succession planning and talent management, as you can see from the graph in front of you. And this information is available from Marisa Norris at the National Center for Healthcare Leadership. So you can see where healthcare probably does the best at rigorously assessing the people within. But then what do we do with those assessments and how do we use them? You can see from the other aspects how healthcare compares. So we have a long way to go. When we talk to our clients about leadership continuity planning, many times we hear things such as, it's really easy to find talent in this tight job market because many executives are out of work. To an extent, that's true, but top talent will remain employed and people will be always going after the top talent. So recruiting your best leaders and retaining your best leaders will always be a challenge. Another thing we hear is retention doesn't really matter because employees don't have any place to go. That's true in a sense, but top performers always have opportunities. Succession planning only focuses on one position, the CEO. Well, I applaud you if you're doing succession planning for your CEO because you're one of 21% of the hospitals across the country based on a 2006 study that was sponsored by the ACHE. However, while this is very important, high-performing organizations strive to build a pipeline for all of their future leaders. Now, not everyone can be developed. Some people are fine just where they are, and they're very happy where they are. But continued development and challenge is still extremely important. Just a few more thoughts about our audience, especially in today's market. We're worried about survival. Talent initiatives now are just too expensive. That's absolutely true. They can be expensive. But be careful of the short-term gains at the expense of your long-term goals and outlook. Our organization is too small for a succession plan. We hear this quite frequently. Certainly, smaller organizations have a limited amount of resources and time. However, while it's challenging, recruiting and developing talent is still important, and exposing them to the environments outside of your organization or to free webinars like this can be very helpful. The other thing that's not on the slide here is also getting your top talent together frequently. Whether they're your top talent or whether they're just your talent pool, some people may be able to be promoted, other people in that talent pool are going to stay right where they are. That's still your talent pool, and they all need to be challenged. So getting them together and helping them to challenge each other with what they've just read or heard or seen, either in healthcare or in other industries, is very invigorating, and many of the top companies use that as one of their strategies for retention of their top talent. Finally, we hear, we have a very young team. They're all in their 40s. We don't hear this very often, granted. Most of the time we hear that everyone is clustered in the mid to late 50s in this market. But there are still organizations out there that have a young team, and succession planning really isn't needed until we know somebody's going to retire. Leadership continuity, succession planning, whatever the case may be, talent management, which brings it all under the same umbrella, is important from the very day that you hire the person, if you're going to retain them long term. So, if you have any questions at this point in the presentation, I would certainly encourage you to send us a question. I wish we could unmute the line so we could have a back and forth. I hate talking into the phone, but that's how these things are set up. So, as we go forward, let's talk about some best practices in healthcare as we've experienced it. Many organizations do begin with just one or two of their most critical positions, and we call that succession planning. Many times that's their CEO. Sometimes that is also their CFO. Possibly it's their chief nursing officer or chief strategist, whoever they feel is going to be very, very difficult to replace. And then they eventually move into leadership continuity by broadening their look across the organization, depth and breadth. Leadership competencies are regularly assessed and changed to fit the future organizational needs. I've mentioned this just a little bit. Maybe not every year you'll need to tweak them, but certainly every 2 years. And the other thing that you want to tweak is not just the words. For example, we all know that a good leader needs to be very strong in communication. But how do you define communication? That's what we mean by regularly assess and make sure that you are identifying and defining your competencies as they are important to the organization today, whether it's more of an internal look or more of a system-wide look or an individual community look. That can certainly change how you define your competencies, while the names of the competencies may remain the same. Leadership continuity should just be one aspect of your entire talent management program, not something extra, not the flavor of today, but figuring out how it becomes part of your entire program of leadership development and talent management, performance appraisal, performance management, etc. Other best practices that we've certainly experienced working with our clients, many times organizational structures need to be accommodated to be able to move in some up-and-coming leaders. Maybe you feel like that maybe makes you a little heavy at the top. It doesn't mean you have to move someone up and make them a vice president, but certainly expanding their area of responsibility or moving them laterally within the organization is a way to continue to challenge and retain that young talent that you don't quite have a place for. Certainly companies like GE and Kleenex in Collins' book, Good to Great, have done the lateral movement, and I know that's much easier to do outside of healthcare. Healthcare has some uniqueness to it, but maybe not as unique as we've always thought we were. So I would challenge you with how many lateral moves you could make within your organization to challenge your leaders. Leadership continuity also considers both performance and potential. Many times the person is a great performer, but they're at the top. They've given it all they've gotten, and that's why they love where they are and they want to stay. If you consider someone's potential as well as their performance, on the opposite realm, maybe someone has great potential, they're extremely bright. However, they just don't have the discipline to stick with and the stick-with-itness to get it done. So looking at both of those performance areas are very important. One thing that's extremely key is a high level of involvement from senior leadership. And most of the time, this is on a day-to-day basis as well as on an annual talent review, where everyone gets together and is able to share their views of the talent that the senior leadership team is watching. What we've experienced is one senior leader may experience the person one way and another one experiences it the other way. And you know how quickly negative feedback travels. So we need to all be on the same page about our talent pool and be working together to bring out the best within our talent on a day-to-day basis as well as sharing on an annual basis. Many of our engagements have actually been at the request of the board. Many of our engagements have been at the request of the board as they begin to look at the CEO retiring in 3 years. They begin to say, who else is going to retire? How old is so-and-so? And so they have asked us to come in and look at their talent, help them with that. Now, there are lots of, I'm sure I just brought up lots of questions about what the board, at what level of detail, rather, the board needs to have about people below the CEO. And I'd be happy to address that at any time if you'd like. The importance of senior leadership, again, we're looking at 2 leaders that are very involved in the National Center for Healthcare Leadership project. Nancy Schlichting of the Henry Ford Health System spends about half of her time in leadership development. They also started their program, which we concur with very much, and that is that they put the senior leadership team through the entire program first so they could see what it feels like, so they could see what kind of tweaks needed to be made, and so they could actually walk the talk with the next level of management as they ask them to do the 360 or any other kind of development tools and assessment tools as part of your process of assessment. Michael Dowling, North Shore, Long Island Jewish Health System, spends even more of his time on leadership development. Jack Welsh of GE spent a third of his time and more during his entire tenure, primarily because when Jack Welsh was promoted, it was pretty ugly. It was a mess. They weren't ready for the transition to leadership, and so he spent a lot of his time developing people. Nothing to say for the current CEO. Regardless of your thoughts, the board had a choice of 3 people to choose from for Jack Welsh's successor. And after that, it's the board's responsibility. So now, let's move to our case study. Again, I would offer this time to ask any questions that you might have. Just type them right in, and Vicki will be happy to share them with the group at the end. Our case study begins with the organizational issues that we learned when we started getting to know the organization. They had a very strong Tier 1 leadership team with many years of experience. There were 2 hospitals, a V&A system, a health plan. They had both employed and non-employed physicians. The hospitals were approximately 20 miles apart. They served very different markets, and of course one was a community hospital and the other was a tertiary teaching hospital. As we looked at their senior leadership team, we also became aware that they were all clustered in age. The average age was about 58. They had one person that was 64, one that was 65, and little or no discussion had occurred with the 2 leaders who were 64 and 65. As I mentioned earlier, they had very good experience in succession planning on a siloed basis within the hospital or within the health plan, for example. It was scattered. It wasn't consistent, even within the hospital. They had limited long-term continuity planning at all tiers. Some of the leadership in the hospital had looked out in some specific positions a little further down within the organization and were mentoring some of the directors, not just the vice presidents. Regardless, they had a traditional approach, what we call the fill-in-the-boxes approach. As I've mentioned, more of a succession planning, limited long-range looking across the entire management structure. No planning had been done at the Tier 1 leadership level. Leadership development gap below Tier 1 was sketchy, and they had just completed a new 5-year strategic plan as we were coming into the organization, as well as a financial plan, and they had not addressed the new competencies that would be needed for their strategic plan going forward. As I stated many times, the board brings us in, and that was the case in this situation as well. They became increasingly aware of the need for talent management. As we began talking with our client and sharing what we saw based on the previous slide, they said to us, we know we're vulnerable. What are the leading edge best practices? How do we do this? We don't want to make anyone mad. We've had people here, they're 56, they've been here for 13 and 25 years. We want to keep them, so do we edge them out? How do we handle this? Also internally, they were a bit risk averse. The bar was much higher for internal candidates than external candidates. As we all know, when we look externally, it's as if we have a clean slate. When we look internally, they bring all of the baggage with them. So managing that within a leadership continuity program, helping those leaders manage their baggage, is certainly doable. Our response to them was, let's look at continuity. Let's look broader than just a replacement planning for a couple of positions. Let's use that new five-year strategic plan as an opportunity to decide what we're going to need in the future. And let's help you identify your gaps. Who's going to depart the organization and when are they going to depart? When they depart, what are they taking with them that is absolutely critical? And what are they taking with them that we could replace with some other skills or abilities or behaviors? What are the new competencies that are necessary based on your strategic plan? And what kind of new structures might we need to think about when the 58-year-old leader that has 19 people reporting to her leaves? Most people can't manage that. And it was simply because the person had grown up in the organization, and it's easier to take on a lot. You know where all the nooks and crannies are within the organization, where people hide on breaks, and you know the same with leadership. You know what people are hiding and can't do very well, and you know that you've filled in some of those gaps when the new person that succeeds you may not be able to do that. Our thought is that if you do most of, or if not all of these things, your organization will continue to thrive. The outcome of our work with this organization was to revise their leadership competency model. They had had one in place for several years. It was developed by an internal leadership development task force made up of people mainly in leadership at all levels of leadership. And we updated that for them. We used many of the same terms, but we gave different definitions. We also decreased the number of competencies that they had, went from 25 down to 10. Yes, there's a lot of compression there, but it's hard to remember 10, let alone 25. We assessed their top 40 leaders against this new competency model. That was the top leadership as well as the vice president level across all entities of the organization, and developed a systematic process for them going forward. We helped them to identify leaders with high potential. This was painful. Not thinking that your entire team, when you've got a team that's humming like a fine-tuned engine, it's very hard to say, well, maybe they don't belong in the high potential group, but they're a really good leader. That's right, they are, and let's keep them. We helped them identify those who were high potential. How ready are they? When will they be ready? What's their risk of leaving? What are their strengths, their potential, etc.? And eventually set them on their way to developing individual development plans. And finally, we only began their thinking of a future organization chart. And quite frankly, about 2 months after we finished our work here, the person who ran the hospital left, and they began thinking about what does the organization look like going forward. Do we need a COO? Do we need to just replace the hospital president? Do we need to make some other changes based on what we find in the market? So they found the previous thinking to be very helpful. So they did have a plan in place for the leadership change and the organization's continued success. It took about 6 months to transition into the new plan, and it was a bit painful. But during that time, the CEO took on some direct reports of high potential individuals. They gave them some extra duties, and the organization is continuing to thrive. Some of the things that, some of the examples of our deliverables, certainly we customize these for the organizations depending on what level of leadership continuity and just how rigorous you want to be in your assessment. But we have evaluated competencies, both the person, we had a self-rating, we had a self-ranking, we had a supervisor rating, and then we also used some external tools to evaluate the competencies. We also used a 9-box, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, to identify high potential. We'll show you that in a little bit more detail. And then some strengths, weaknesses, development focus, and leadership continuity focus, where the pipeline and successors can be placed. This is primarily to be used for conversation and to be kept up, and to be updated along the way. This particular organization did take someone out of their leadership development group and made them responsible as a staff person for keeping everything updated and helping the leadership get ready for their annual talent reviews. As you might guess, as a senior leader, and you've got 6 people reporting to you, if you get their performance management completed yearly and timely, you're doing a fabulous job. So to keep all of this other updated, certainly you need a little bit of support in doing that, or at least some prompting. This is what their leadership looks like across the organization. You can see within the 9 box that they're almost all over. The 3 boxes in the upper right-hand corner, B1 as well as A1 and A2, are identified as the boxes of high potential on our tool. Sometimes the tools flip, so again, whatever tools you like and or are used to. And this slide shows how we helped them see where their high potential were, and even though they were the future leaders, when are they going to be ready? Is it going to be next year? Is it going to be 3 years from now? Et cetera. So how do we plan for that? Finally, let's get to the topic of the day, the top 5 do's from our perspective. You absolutely have to have CEO commitment, backed up by a great HR leader with full support of senior management. It cannot be done alone. It can't be done just by senior management who think this is a great program. It can't be done by a stellar HR leader. The CEO has to drive it with support from the rest of the team. Be clear about what your organization needs for a future leader today as well as in the future. Identify those people that are high potential and pay attention to their development plans. Rigorously assess and manage the careers. And by this we mean let's look at the tough news and help them through that. Many times they are mimicking a leader who in another time in the organization was what the organization needed, and no longer is that kind of behavior necessary. What comes top of mind there is the turnaround situation takes a clearly different style than growth and maintenance. I don't know if there's any maintenance in healthcare today, but certainly growth mode. 2 very different leadership styles and competencies. Some people can change from a turnaround person to a growth-oriented, but many cannot. So that's part of what we're talking about by the rigorously assessed. The other thing we speak to with the rigorously assessed is using different tools versus just hearsay, so that you have some very objective information to back up your development plans with. The best one of the highlights that we hear from our clients, leaders, that they gain out of this process. We typically go in and interview and assess their top leaders, is that they said, it's been a long time since somebody really asked me what I wanted to be when I grow up, and really kind of walked through the steps that it's okay if you're just the very best you are where you are, and help them understand some of their strengths and weaknesses. So that self-awareness is what they were telling us for the most part that they gained from this process. And it's certainly something that can be very hard to give yourself time for in our hectic lifestyle on the treadmill. We help them to integrate this process into their leadership development and process, and so that it didn't feel like it was just one more thing on the leader's plate. And they're still working on the disciplined execution of the process. That's a never-ending challenge, I think. Again, 5 taboos. You can't, if you don't have commitment of the CEO, chances of the program working long term are very skeptical. And then the thought that HR is responsible for all people processes. HR is responsible for supporting this process, but all of the leaders are responsible for all of the leadership within the organization. Developing talent simply for yesterday's needs, not updating or discussing the competencies of leadership profile for your organization. interrupting that talent pipeline flow when you have to put a freeze on hiring or a freeze on hiring the best talent. When you find someone who you think might be a great fit for your organization, but not at this time and not in this role, is there any way to get that person into your organization, or how can you stay in touch with that organization, with that person rather, until you're ready for them or they're ready for you? And then finally, really doing nothing at all certainly won't get you down the path of leadership continuity and developing and preparing your organization to strive and thrive in the future. High-performing organizations have a high level of engaged employees as well as talented employees. That concludes the formal portion of our presentation today. We certainly would welcome your questions now. So take a few minutes, let Vicki gather up the questions. And again, I apologize that it can't be more interactive. So please let's be modern leaders and communicate via the internet.
All right. Thank you very much, Kathy. Excuse me. As Kathy said, we'll go ahead and break here at the end of our presentation and take any questions that have come in. Before I start organizing through some of the ones that have filtered in, I'm going to just do a quick review on instructions on how to do it for all our participants. Top of your screen, there's a menu bar going across. There's a little Q&A button. You simply click on that to open it, type in your question, submit it. It'll filter over to me, and I'll be able to read it off and have Kathy hopefully answer it for you. That said, give me a moment while I organize through some of our questions.
If you'd like to add any comments to the program that I just presented, and not in the form of a question, let's please take this time to share with our colleagues things that you have found. Maybe I said something that sort of hit a nerve in your leadership continuity program. If so, and you found a way around that, let's share our knowledge through this media.
Okay, Kathy, I have a first question here for you. This participant asked to please make some further comments on the role of the governing board.
Oh, absolutely. The role of the governing board is to make sure that, of course, that this organization continues to thrive and support and to achieve its mission and vision within the community or market that it serves. The board's responsibility is primarily focused on the CEO and any leadership who may possibly be a successor for the CEO. However, what the board needs to know is that there is a plan in place and that the CEO is talking regularly, and by that I mean once or twice a year, depending on the timeline for that person's transition and or retirement. Having the conversation primarily with the chairman of the board and at the largest scope, the executive committee of the board. They need reassurance that you are developing certain people or that you've been developing someone, and this last year they just haven't continued to grow. So keeping them updated on who the CEO has his or her eye on is certainly what the board wants to know. They do not need to see the performance reviews of the talent pool. They don't need to see their 360s. They don't need to see that level of detail. The board is the board, and they're in charge. And so I would invite you to offer what they'd like to see within a very confidential confine. Let them come into your office. Let them look at the reports if they're interested, with your supervision, so that you can explain what the reports mean. Many times they've never been part of a process like this. So to sum that up, the governing board is privy to the senior leaders that the CEO thinks are improving and growing towards his or her position. But beyond that, it needs to be that information needs to be kept in very tight reins.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Kathy. I'm going to answer this participant's question myself very quickly. They asked if it's possible to get a copy of our presentation. And yes, you certainly all will get a copy. You'll get a email copy of it that Kathy will be following up with all our participants. So you will indeed be getting that, and I'll go through some other areas on our website where you can find resources following our Q&A session here as well. So I hope that answers your question. Can we go ahead and take another question here? Kathy, this participant asked how this, and I'm assuming by this meaning the today's topic, is different from leadership development.
That's a very good question. It's different in that it's more of a strategic planning, and we look at not only the organization, but we're looking at the individual. So we're looking at the individual development plan. It kind of depends on how you've defined leadership development in your organization. But however you have defined leadership development, certainly these two processes should be integrated and work together. Many times leadership development within an organization simply means that you're providing leadership topics, whether from an internal person or an external person, to whoever would like to participate. Other organizations have more disciplined leadership development programs where people apply or are nominated, and they're part of the leadership development process within your organization. Regardless of what processes you have in place, this should be integrated within that process. It should not be separate from it, but yet it sort of takes it one step further. And something we didn't talk about today are certainly some metrics that you might want to put in place so that you know you're getting the return on your investment, which many times is tough in some of the softer developmental programs that are in place within leadership development and talent management. However, it certainly can be done, and more people are coming to the journals with those metrics. I hope that helps.
I think it did. Thank you, Kathy. This is actually a great question. If we can't afford to involve our entire leadership team in the process, how do we approach this so that everyone understands we are supportive of their development?
Wow, that's a really good question. The way that we recommend that you do it, and again, there's not one right way to do this. Many times we go into the client and say, here's our thoughts, and the client says, well, what about this? And then we say, what about this? And so we come up with one. But when you can't involve all of your leadership group, which most organizations can't, is that you start with some kind of an application. Who's very interested? Who has the senior team noticed is really coming along? Who do they think has potential but just hasn't had some mentoring and development opportunities? And the main thing is to be as transparent as you can. When these programs become secretive, that's when they start to no longer flourish. So simply stating that, you know, we'd love to have everyone involved, but we can't, so we're taking applications and or nominations, and and I would certainly suggest the senior team work with HR in deciding who goes into that program. Everybody's not always going to be happy, but as long as you're transparent and you tell them that how the process works, this works very well, and many organizations do this simply for their leadership development. And if you already call it leadership development and you have a very detailed, disciplined process, perhaps you don't call it leadership continuity. Perhaps you simply add these additional disciplines by identifying the leaders, keeping track of their progress, see if their progress has been stifled. Maybe they need a new mentor within the organization. Maybe they need a mentor outside of the organization. One thing that we're sure of, and that is that executive development is the responsibility of the executive. The organization can be very supportive, but the executive has to take the initiative and ask for what they need with some support from us. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes. Sounds great. And I'm only going to take a couple more questions because we're kind of rounding out our time here, and I want to make sure that we don't, take up everyone's day or go over our time. So I'll take our second to last question here, and that is, we have a repeat customer who makes me very happy. He says, we listened to your webinar last month regarding CEO leadership transition and succession. Is the CEO part of this program also?
I like to say absolutely. Certainly, in our experience, most of the time the CEO has taken part in this process for the exact reason that I mentioned earlier, that the group at Henry Ford, so that he or she knows what the rest of the team is going through. There's also a certain level of vulnerability that is absolutely unsurpassed in the value that it brings when your CEO gets up and says, I was just reading my assessment results to my children at the breakfast table this morning, and I read this one part that said, at times you can be sort of perfectionistic, and the CEO said to his children, do you really think that's true? And he said, I looked around, and my two children and my wife were hysterically laughing. So he said, so I guess that means I'm perfectionistic not only in the workplace but at home. So we absolutely recommend the CEO is part of this. If the CEO chooses not to do it, that's fine. But the CEO is absolutely part of revising the competencies. They are part of the talent review. They understand the process. This is driven by the CEO. Whether he or she decides to take part in all of the assessment factors is certainly one thing. But for them to not be part of it, it's just not possible. So yes, they are part of the process. They're the leader of the process.
Great, thank you. As I said, I'm going to take just one more question here, and then I'll let you know in a minute how you can get other questions answered and have a discussion with Kathy individually if we didn't get a chance to get to you today. So our final question for today will be, we currently have a leadership development program, and I would not want to have this as an add-on to that program. How does this work with our current program?
Hopefully I addressed that a little earlier when they said, when I answered more than the question, when they said we have leadership development, how is that different? It shouldn't be an add-on. It should be integrated into the process of leadership development. Again, you can call it whatever you like to call it. Many people call this St. Francis University, for example, and under that is all of their talent management, leadership development, continuity, and succession. So it's not different. It should be well integrated into your overall talent management process. That's really the umbrella that all of this falls under, whether it be leadership continuity within the organization, leadership development, CEO succession, CEO transition, et cetera. All of that falls under talent management.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kathy. Like I said, that will bring us to the end of our presentation and our Q&A session. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Up on your screen here, I've had contact information for Kathy. If you have further questions or you'd like to have a discussion with her, as I mentioned earlier, you can just simply give her a call. The number is listed right on there, or pop her an email. I already mentioned that a copy of these slides will be emailed to everyone. In addition, a recording of this webinar will, plus other resources, like articles and white papers and other presentations, will be able to be found on our website. You'll simply just go to ihstrategies.com and navigate to our Knowledge Center, and all those resources are within that page. Also, to see a listing of other upcoming events, webinars, industry conferences or whatnot that you can find consultants from our firm at, you can visit the events page of our website, and there's a listing on there. Thanks again for your participation, and have a wonderful day.